I rise to speak in support of the motion in my name. Essentially, our motion calls on the government to decriminalise cannabis. It references, of course, the resolution of the 2025 and 2024 Labor State Conferences to implement a fully legalised cannabis market. But our motion also calls for the more modest interim step of decriminalisation, the entirely reasonable demand to stop arresting people for the possession and use of cannabis. We entered Parliament with high hopes of progressing the legislation of cannabis. We are Legalise Cannabis after all, the name's on the tin. It seems so obvious from a health perspective and from a justice perspective that the continuing prohibition of cannabis is detrimental and it is expensive. It's based on an outdated stigmatisation of a well-used plant substance, one which nearly 42% of Victorians have tried, 21% use regularly, and 41% supported the decriminalisation, a percentage, I might add, that has increased to 80% in the time that we have been in Parliament. The Parliamentary Budget Office estimates the income from a legal market for cannabis could be $1 billion a year, and that is, we understand, a conservative figure. It's hard to argue against a legal market if you can use money to fund mental health, disability, and alcohol and other drug services, while simultaneously reducing the costs and resource burden on justice and correction services. The main difference between a licit and an illicit market is that one contributes to the prosperity of the state and the other prospers criminals and works against the health and well-being of our citizens. It's obvious that criminalisation is not making a huge difference to the business model of the criminals supplying cannabis. While cannabis accounted for more than half of all drug-related arrests across Australia since 2021, 90% of those people were arrested, 90% of those who were arrested were consumers, not suppliers. The economic and social opportunities of a legalised market are very obvious. And our party's view are widely shared by members of the Victorian branch of the Australian Labor Party, who voted for the adoption of the legalisation of cannabis without opposition, as firstly a floor resolution and subsequently as part of its own health policy platform. That's 2 state conferences in a row with no opposition to those changes. But I'm getting ahead of myself, and I'll return to that question. The war on drugs has proven to be, let's face it, one of the worst and most damaging public policy decisions of all time. In Victoria, we've already spent nearly 100 years and billions of dollars fighting it, and yet people continue to consume drugs. It's really way past time for Victoria to remove this outdated law from the statutes. So when we arrived, we envisaged opening up an adult dialogue with a progressive government. We're a progressive state. We pride ourselves on it, don't we? We'd be up for trying something different, wouldn't we? The former Treasurer saw the benefits of a legal market, why wouldn't he? And we had high hopes of progress based on our conversations with him. We requested costings for a legalised market from the Parliamentary Budget Office, and their report researched the findings from other jurisdictions that have legalised recreational cannabis use. The numbers were good. The report determined that the decrease in cannabis-related offences and associated sentencing outcomes would result in a reduction in operating expenses for Victoria Police, public prosecutions, the courts, correctional services and other ancillary justice-related services. Surely that alone should be worth the effort. Clearly, any progressive government with a little bit of courage and some imagination could see the logic in ending this senseless prohibition and seizing the opportunities that a vibrant local market could provide. All the evidence pointed in the same direction. We could see it, the government could see it. So the question became, how could we work with the government to bring about a reform that is, as Tony Parsons, the former supervising magistrate of the Drug Court, described in his 2025 Pennington oration, the holy trinity of good policy. It's the right thing to do, it's backed by evidence, and it enjoys broad community support. But apparently the government needed more hand-holding. What about an expert advisory panel, we suggested? A group of leading experts to examine the best way to regulate a legalised market that would advance Victoria's public health goals and generate revenue for vital services. A brand new market that could operate equitably and help repair the damage wrought by the war on drugs and its inherent discrimination. A brand new market that could increase opportunities for marginalised communities for our First Nations people. It could be based on some of the social equity schemes operating in other jurisdictions. The possibilities are really very exciting. Well, that idea sank like a stone. No pun intended. Even taking a tiny incremental step towards a sensible and equitable policy was too bold a move for this government. We then suggested decriminalisation instead. Decriminalisation is not ideal. It prohibits the supply side, which still allows criminals to control the illicit market, but as a first step towards a legal market, at least we could stop arresting around 4,000 Victorians each year. People largely from marginalised communities already overrepresented in the justice system. At least we could start undoing the harms associated with arrests and contact with the criminal justice system. And at least we could free up the police, the courts, the jails to deal with the crimes that actually reduce community safety. We introduced our Drugs, Poisons and Controlled Substances Amendment, Regulation of Personal Adult Use of Cannabis Bill 2023 under the name of my colleague Ms Payne. It was a modest bill that would make it lawful for an adult to possess small quantities of cannabis, cultivate 6 cannabis plants for personal use, and gift cannabis to another adult. It's essentially the same scheme that has been successfully operating in Canberra, with a few necessary improvements. During the debate, we heard the concerns of members around children accessing cannabis and the inevitable increase in hospital presentations and carnage on our roads. Unfortunately, or fortunately, that's not the data that was coming out of the ACT. People may cherry-pick evidence from overseas jurisdictions. Some are dealing with the transition to a legal market better than others. But when the data is for decrim, and when it comes from a jurisdiction more or less across the border, and it's looking so positive, you would think it's hard to dismiss. The government rejected our bill, but committed to consult with stakeholders. But they didn't. But being the team players that we are, we agreed to refer the bill to an inquiry. The inquiry into the Drugs, Poisons and Controlled Substances Amendment, Regulation of Personal Adult Use of Cannabis Bill 2023, heard evidence from the justice, mental health and legal sectors, the vast majority of whom were in favour of decriminalisation as a model that would serve the public health goals of harm minimisation and prevention. The committee travelled to the ACT to see firsthand the evidence that the scheme is working as intended. Arrests are down 94%. Cannabis use among young people has actually decreased. There's been no increase in hospital admissions. None of the dire predictions around cannabis decriminalisation have materialised. In fact, we had the privilege to meet with the ACT Chief Police Commissioner himself, and he told us that they had initially had concerns, but none had come to pass. The report was tabled with recommendations, fully supported by the government members of the committee, and to draw on the experience of the ACT in successfully decriminalising the cultivation and possession of small quantities of cannabis for personal use with its associated health, social and legal benefits. The committee also resolved to consider adopting an approach in line with that proposed by the bill, along with any recommended amendments from the report. It's a sensible proposal. It's rooted in evidence and supported by the majority of Victorians. But this government has ruled it out completely. They won't even consider it. We are frankly gobsmacked at the lack of courage, the utter cowardice of that decision. And we're also puzzled. Why wouldn't the government, this progressive Victorian Labor government, support a proposal to stop needlessly arresting people? If you want to forgo the illicit cannabis market big bucks, fine. But arresting people for possessing a bit of pot? Is that how they're tackling crime in this state? We are talking about allowing people to grow a few plants in their backyard and to be able to possess a small amount of cannabis for personal use. How stupid does this government think people are? As remand centres and prisons fill, does this government think that no one knows the difference between violent crime and the victimless offence of possession or use of cannabis? That people don't know the difference between a machete and a joint? Do they honestly think people are terrified by the thought of pot smokers running amok? Are they really bundling up people who want to grow some pot in their gardens with the sort of serious crime that communities are actually contending with? Do they really think the arrest of cannabis users makes people feel safer? Let's recall that around 750,000 Victorians consumed cannabis in the last 12 months. Are we going to lock them all up? This is a government fixated on flexing their tough-on-crime credentials at any opportunity before the next election. And your average punter can tell the difference between sensible policy and knee-jerk tough-on-crime rhetoric. There is a significant cognitive dissonance within the Allen government. Last week I was truly proud and humbled to be present for the signing of Australia's first treaty at Government House. This government has every right to be proud of that accomplishment. But this historic achievement is seriously undermined by the fact that the government continues to use cannabis as a means of shuttling First Nations people into the criminal justice system. The Victorian Aboriginal Legal Service told the Bill Inquiry that, and I quote, Aboriginal people were 8 times more likely to be arrested for possession of cannabis than non-Indigenous people. In contrast, non-Indigenous people arrested for the possession of cannabis were 50% more likely to receive a caution in Victoria. 8 times as likely to be arrested, half as likely to be offered diversion. And that is not a novel fact. It's one the government has heard time and time again. I hardly recognise this Labor government as such. I really don't know what they stand for. It's content to rest on past achievements, leaning on its establishment brand. They're about as progressive a government as can be when its policy goals are dictated by the likes of Fifi, Fev and Nick. I hope I got that pronunciation correct this time. Or whatever the Herald Sun leads with on their front page. The Labor Party I grew up with stood for social justice, for equity and for human rights. It was a party of vision that introduced land rights, the Racial Discrimination Act and no-fault divorce. It was a party for workers. And let's face it, cannabis is first and foremost a working class drug. It was a party that espoused progressive values and policies. At least their members seem to hold fast to the light on the hill and their progressive values. The values these members express, the policies they want to see adopted, are befitting of a movement that introduced universal healthcare and free tertiary education, of a party synonymous with progressive reform. The ALP State Conference resolutions are totally reasonable motions. The delegates to that conference represent the workers of this state, workers from the health, the mental health, the disability sectors, people who work in public housing and homelessness services, workers from the AOD sector, and the aged care sector. They see the underinvestment by this government in those sectors and the impact that it is having on the health and well-being of Victorians, and they propose a common sense solution. Revenue from a legalised market could be very useful to a state drowning in debt. Of course, it would require an agreement between the state and the federal government, but they're both Labor governments, and so it shouldn't really be hard to get some level of collaboration over the division of taxes and income. Let's say And wouldn't it be lovely to have those funds be able to contribute to meeting the recommendations from the Royal Commission into Victoria's mental health system? the reform of the alcohol and other drug sector, work cover, housing, Indigenous health, or even fund our state's contribution to the National Disability Insurance Scheme. We're not pretending it's going to pay for all of those things, but if this government's reached a point where $1 billion is something to sneer at, I think we've all got a big problem. It certainly makes a lot more sense than simply handing it all to the common shareholders. I hope I'm alive to see the day when governments finally wake up to the fact that these policies harm people and enrich serious crime gangs. But if we're not there yet, how about the idea that even the money saved through not policing a victimless offence has utility? It's obviously not as much as what could be derived from legalising cannabis. However, the trauma and harm averted would have huge downstream positive impacts for our society and for our economy. And then there's the people, of course, the many vulnerable Victorians who would not have their lives ruined by encounters with the criminal justice system. We don't want children to have access to cannabis. Children should not be consuming cannabis. It's bad for their brains. But make no mistake, for all the prohibition, kids have no trouble at all accessing cannabis. It's easier for a kid to get their hands on some weed than it is to buy a packet of cigarettes. Worse, the prohibition, the just say no approach, means we are not having the sorts of conversations we should be able to have in schools. There's inadequate education around drugs and harm reduction in school. So yeah, it is quite possible that kids are not getting the right messages. We're not properly informing our young folk. Interestingly, very recent data out of Canada shows that contrary to what's happening here, youth consumption of cannabis has actually fallen since the legislation of cannabis. Since the legalisation of cannabis. There was even a slight increase in the number of young people who reported that they'd never used cannabis. Of course, Canada accompanied their legalisation scheme with a comprehensive education program. What a bold approach. Put the facts in front of young people and treat them with a little respect. Maybe disseminating information about harm minimisation and risk is more useful in reducing youth consumption than fear campaigns. Germany also recently reported no increase in use among young people or in traffic accidents since legalisation. Given the wealth of evidence, the backing of experts, the wide public support, I really don't think we would still be having to convince this government to make at least some movement towards reform. Nobody said this was going to be easy. Decriminalisation and eventually legalisation will present all sorts of challenges, no doubt. There will be problems to solve and things to nut out, but we cannot keep doing what we're doing. Adults should be free to consume cannabis. They do it already. We are missing an opportunity to get on the front foot and to do this right. What have we got to lose? We call on this government to respect the clearly articulated views of its own party members and reform our cannabis laws. Cannabis has been prohibited in Victoria since 1927. We are coming up to the centenary of this stupid and ineffective law. We can keep trying to deal with these same problems that we have been doing unsuccessfully for nearly 100 years, or we can end the prohibition and perhaps get on with dealing with some new problems and some real problems with fresh eyes. Thank you.